You're listening to EdTech Heroes, a podcast that looks at how teachers in today's classrooms can use technology to improve student learning. In each episode, a hero in the world of education will share their story and discuss how innovation can influence the minds of the next generation. Let's jump in.
Hey y'all, and welcome to EdTech Heroes. I am your host, Nef, and today I'm excited to be joined by Sultan Rana. Sultan is an instructor and course director at York University and is an EDD candidate at Ontario Tech University. Welcome to EdTech Heroes. How are you doing today?
Hey, thank you. I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
All right. So you've been a teacher, and from what I understand, you were so great as a teacher that they plucked you out of the classroom and they're like, okay, this dude is so great that we want him to go teach other teachers. So tell us a little bit about your journey in education.
All right, thanks. I should have you as my front person for every time I'm looking for a job. So I have to admit it's going to sound pretty listy when I break it down what I've done, but I just don't want to take up too much time and give you this long narrative. I've been in the game for about 15 years now. So my wheelhouse has always been digital tech with social justice ed and anti-racist education. So the fusion of those three things. I taught in the classroom for 11 years. I've taught every grades from grade 4 to 12 as like the homeroom classroom teacher, but I've supported every grades from K to 12. I have had the opportunity to teach in the Greater Toronto area. And then my summer gigs, I would do out supporting University of California as a director of ID Tech camps out there as well. So that was a different way of, I guess, engaging with education in a different sphere. So anyone who's familiar with ID Tech camps in the States, respect. I had a great time there. And then I also did a 2-year stint teaching in Malaysia at a Canadian secondary school in Malaysia where I taught at high school. And it was basically like a Canadian high school out of Toronto, plucked out of Toronto and thrown into Kuala Lumpur. So that was one of the greatest experiences of my life. And it was just so dope to live abroad. So I did that. And then in around 2016, I got selected to be a digital education consultant. That was around my 12th year of teaching. And I did that gig for about 3 years. And then in 2019, as you had eloquently entered in with, I got seconded to the York University's Faculty of Education, where I was seconded to teach, interestingly enough, not the things that often draw attention to me, which is usually digital tech. I was selected to teach basically the How to Teach 101 courses on physical education and social studies for the primary, junior, intermediate grades, the equity and diversity course, and the content and practice, which is basically How to Teach Pedagogy 101. So I did that for 3 years, and it was the best experience for sure. It was a dream come true. And then now I'd like to say I'm arriving back home. It's a homecoming back to the classroom. I'll be teaching grade 6, 7 in a couple of weeks in one of the cities outside of the Toronto area named Markham. It's been an exciting journey and a lot of experiences. I hold a master's in education in digital technologies, or digital education, excuse me. As you were saying, I'm currently engaging in my doctorate in my education, my EdD. Both we're at Ontario Tech University, which, for those who read anything online about Canadian universities, we're trying to be the MIT of the North. So it's I'm very happy to be in a really forward-moving school, and I'm really excited. I'm an Apple Distinguished Educator, a Google Certified Innovator and Trainer, a Raspberry Pi Certified Educator. I got a few credentials there, and I think I'm done hustling. I think I'm gonna just chill for a while and just get back in with my pedagogy and do my research for my doctorate. So that's the journey.
All right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and quite a journey, to be honest. One thing that I'm curious about is you've had this opportunity to engage with educators over the last 2 years to be in this place where you are what I would call education adjacent, right? Like you're still very much in that field, but aren't a classroom practitioner. So now that you're going back to being a classroom practitioner, what are some of the things that you are going to do differently that you weren't doing 2 years ago before you started at York?
That's a really good question. I'm going to go heavy with the community and parent engagement. I definitely, you can't go anywhere like after, especially with the pandemic happening. So many of my answers are going to be prefaced with post-pandemic. You can't do anything or start anything for people without them. And, I just, it's to support children in the world that we're living in now and what they just went through. I need the parents to be on board. So when we're engaging in relevant learning, culture responsive education, relevant and healthy sexual education, mental health education, I need the parents to be on board. So I'm going to go in hard with the parent and community engagement, really heavy with the collaborative assessment, which I might be getting into today when we talk about some of the tools I've used. I just honestly, if there's one thing that the university taught me is we need to figure out a way to empower students in their learning. And I know it sounds gitchy, so I'll just break it down. We need to stop being the gateholders of the currency in education, which is their grades. If students don't have some kind of agency in making sense of what grade they get or how they got to a grade or how did they arrive, how did somebody evaluate or assess them and their learning without them, I think that's a problem that we need to interrupt. So I'll leave it at that. The two major things I'm going in with is the heavy community and parent and guardian engagement, and empowering students to really have some clout and some influence in the grades that they get and the definition of what they learned, that they will be the architects and they will be the writers of making sense of what was this learning experience like, and was it relevant to them. Yeah. And that's and one thing I'll say as a person, individual, I'm done with the imposter syndrome. If there's anything that this journey, I listed it out to you, and when I read it and I say it out loud, sometimes, I got to kiss myself and be like, yeah, you did all right. You did all right. So I think I'm done that, that bashfulness, that idea that I'm just lucky. I think I have a leg to stand on now to say that, what, when I want to try things and I do it for the right reasons, I'm good to go forward with it. So the imposter syndrome is done. I buried that in the ground after. So I'm going to go back hopefully a little bit more confident.
Yeah, that's a major props to you for being able to do that. I think that is something that a lot of us struggle with, myself included, of second guessing our decisions or wondering if we have the right to be in a space.
Mm.
So being able to say, you know what, I've done the work to be able to stand in front of these kids and make decisions that I know are worthwhile and are going to be positive is a big one. You also kind of dropped a bomb here around assessment and how students play a part in that. And I don't want to just run over that one, but I am going to pause for a second because I think that we're going to have some really good discussions about what that looks like pragmatically, where we give students a seat at the table to be able to talk about what they've learned and what assessment looks like. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the tools that we use. And one of the reasons that we invited you on the show is because you've been using Screencastify a lot to be able to create assessments and replace presentations in your classroom. Can you talk about not just your use of Screencastify, but why video has been a cool thing that you've leaned into over the past couple of years?
Yeah, it's I've always, all these years since I got into the game, and when I got my first job in 2006. Since then, I always, the whole culture of schooling, I'm not going to say education, the culture of schooling has been really transactional, really performative, all about competition, cutthroat. And I was never feeling it because it's not competitive sports. This is like, you have no choice. Like, it's by law, you have to be in an institution in schooling and receive schooling until a certain age. So I just didn't understand the culture of it. And I noticed that so much learning that students engaged in that produced artifacts were very transactional, very kind of like, once it was done, throw it in the bag, knock my head over a toilet, empty out my brain. It's done. I don't need to think about it anymore. It's not a part of me. And, when learning, I'm not saying all learning has to be a part of your DNA, like change you and be so transformative, but I didn't see any of it be transformative, any of it impact students. And what also kind of bothered me was that much of the learning was almost like king and queen service. Like, they're only doing this because the teacher asked. And once the teacher sees it, appraises it, evaluates it, it's meaningless and nothing to anyone else. And that just sucks the oxygen out of the room. That means that the only person that really matters at the end of the day is the teacher. And that kind of made me a little nauseated. So I preface all that to say something like presentation, something like where students unquestionably are putting forth to either a room, to a small group, to a classroom, heck, to a gymnasium or a stadium. They are being accountable for something that they're saying that they understand and that they know and they learn. And it always kind of
Mhm.
perturbed me how that dissipates in the air after it's done. It just doesn't exist anymore unless someone was recording it or unless a lot of people saw it. And then it became like there was some brouhaha after and people were talking about it. Or you as the teacher asked them to recollect on it. But then even on top of that, when you actually have conversations with students about their presentation, you and I and everyone listening knows we know how it is we know what the vantage point of us as the presenter is, but we don't know what we look like to the presented. So they don't even get the
Mm.
vantage point. Like the presenter doesn't get the vantage point of like, oh, that's what tone and intonation means. And oh, like I could have had, a different, a change in my pacing, or I could have added something here, or I didn't say this with the importance or value that I thought people would get it as. So it was just very interesting. Like even when you have the conversation after the fact, it's hard to get people to get back into that moment because it is, like I just said, it dissipates in air. So when I look at things like Screencastify, and particularly Screencastify Submit, which I ended up serendipitously becoming in love with, I see those tools not only from a access point, the fact that they're free to use for a certain amount of time, and then if you wanted to pay a very nominal fee, a small fee, you get like this whole workshop of tools, and a workshop of tools that are limited enough for the most novice person to use. And
Mm.
I don't say that to be like, I hope Screencastify gets sales from this. Like, I mean, it's really important. Like, as somebody who's in the tech world, you get into all these tools, and it has this smorgasbord cornucopia of a million tools. And before you even get started, students and users and teachers are already flatlining with their interest and their willingness to engage with it because it looks too daunting. So,
Mm.
Screencastify in all of its offerings and its access points was just a really easy engagement point for me. But when you have students record their presentations and they exist in and outside of the time in which they were recorded, so much can be engaged with, so much thinking, replaying, rethinking, rehashing, conversing about, using evidence-based moments in one's presentation to bring to light
Mhm.
inconsistencies, tensions, great learning, moments of parallel thought where students can be like, "Oh shoot, you thought the same thing I did." Like when I read that, or we think similarly, and you think that you're like, you're on the fringes, you're like you're an outlier, and then you start finding out people can see this, and then I say that, and everyone's like, "Okay, well, you just have this folder full of recordings." To what I'll say to that is the digital technologies that are available now, the things you are able to do, the things you are able to kind of replicate, the whole, one thing I'll probably get into in this conversation is, creating film festivals for presentations in your classroom where you set time, you use time differently and effectively, where you have students literally be able to, in their own insulated way, watch and hear and connect with every single person in their classroom or group or, designated quad or whatever, to really listen to people, and not be worried about, oh, I got to present in like 6 minutes, or be a little
Mhm.
bit more thoughtful and caring to be like, hey, I've already done my project already. I have nothing to worry about. Let me listen to this person and see what they're doing and see what they're sharing. Because, the one thing I'm so happy that to have interrupted is the culture of presentations in the classroom. And I was sharing this at the Screencastify booth at ISTE, where I'm happy that I feel like I've eradicated is that realm that happens in classrooms when you're like, okay, everybody, for the next 2 days or the next 3 periods, we're having presentations. And there's two states that the students are in. One state is they're sweating bullets and they're pooping their pants because they're about to go present soon. So all they're doing is being inundated with the worries and the concerns about when they present.
Mhm.
And then the other phase, like maybe we have one or two students who are thoughtful and caring and are listening. But in my own experiences, the other state is screw it. I already presented. I'm good. Like I can chill now. I can doodle, and nothing's wrong with doodling, but I can doodle and not listen attentively. I don't have to connect with this person. Like the thing I'm being evaluated with, the thing that gives me my currency in this classroom, I've taken care of it. I'm good. And I just am so happy that this Screencastify thing has allowed me to do away with it. Because even if that culture still existed with these recordings, I can get all these recordings and then say to everyone, all right, take a 1 week break. Let's do some other stuff. And we're going to come back to these presentations when you get all of this out of your mind and we can come in fresh. So I just appreciate what the recordings do for me when it allows me to leverage and utilize time and space and people's presence differently.
That's a real interesting point, right? Like I think that is one thing to think about how allowing a student to record their thoughts fundamentally changes the pressure and anxiety that they might feel in a classroom. And I'm with that, especially as somebody who I think has been in those modes, right? Like if I'm in a meeting and I'm about to present something that's big, my heart is racing, I'm tapping. There's no way I'm actually hearing and conceptualizing what's happening before me. And that's one thing. And that's really, really important that we allow students to feel safe in our classrooms. But I think what is another thing that I don't think that I've thought about fully is this idea of how much space you need to get out of that sort of fight or flight of the presentation to actually be able to internalize the presentations of your peers, right? Like you've had an opportunity to reflect on your own, you have had some other learning, and now you're circling back to this concept. And the other thing that I think is interesting, and maybe this is not the case for every student, but I know when I went through schooling, I kind of went through this sort of cycle of, okay, let me cram this thing, let me understand this unit. And then now that I am ready to move on to the next thing, my brain has forgotten where we just were. And when you bring that back up as a teacher, you disrupt that cycle. You like start to teach your kids that are sitting in your classroom that this class is different. We are going to go back and revisit where we've already been in pretty meaningful ways. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. And your contribution mattered. I mean, your perspective mattered. What you perceived has currency in this room. Like, yeah, you may have all read the same journal article or the same, you're all perceiving the same image or visionary or visual, but perception is going to be different. And we got to give time and space for that, for you to not only hear other people's perspective, but also understand that there was no one answer. There was no one pathway to this learning. There's numerous pathways, and every pathway was valuable and valid. Granted, you backed it up and you had the opportunity to back it up. Another thing I didn't share that I definitely leverage with Screencastify is I always ensure that the camera is off in their presentations. There's an abundant amount of research that talks about, the impact that our identities have in the spaces that we hold. And don't get me wrong, you can still, the oppression of people based on identity can still come through your voice, your cadence, your accent, depending on, the value one places on particular accents from around the world. But with that said, when you attempt to limit some of the things that often preoccupy real estate in the presenter's mind when they are presenting, you know what I mean? Like I can say as somebody who was, I was front row in the going through puberty and being very awkward going through puberty stage where I had to do presentations and, the things that go through your mind, like, please, Lord, don't let this and this and that happen, or don't let them notice this, that, and the other about me while I'm doing a presentation on the War of 1812. Like it's what I appreciate about this tool is while you can't take away everything, you can make moves towards creating that level or that attempt to create peace in the presenter's mind, that, okay, out of the things that people can sometimes stereotype or typecast on us, we're going to limit that here. And then just the last thing I'll say is the accessibility piece. Don't get me wrong, now we have microphones and stuff, and we could put a Google slide deck that's transcribed in the back of somebody to have your words transcribed for you. But think about, our students who are hard of hearing or that are learning English and just need that can do so much better with the extra support of having transcribed the dictation out of someone's mouth being transcribed for them on the screen. It's just, there's just, I could go on, but I don't want to take up too much time on that one. There's so many things when it comes to access and identity that I also have serendipitously noticed that this tool is allowing me to attempt to the stronghold that they've had on kids in the past, out of the presentation world, at least.
Yeah, I'm here for it. I think the other thing that I think is anxiety inducing for lots of folks is this live aspect
Mm.
of presentations, right? If you mess it up, everybody has seen it right in that moment. There's not much you can do about it. You're the talk of recess or the talk of the
Hmm.
town. And I think whether you allow students to have their camera on or camera off, and I think that you have sort of talked about some compelling reasons why we might want to have students at least have the option of having their camera
No
off.
doubt.
What I think is really cool about video is this opportunity for a student to say, you know what? Let me re-record that, or let me edit that, or let me do something so that I am able to present what I feel like is my best work for the teacher. And if I am self-conscious about the way that I present myself because I have pronounced a word in a way that I perceive to be weird, or a hair is out of place, or whatever
Hmm.
it is, we give students that space to be able to say, you know what? This is not the way I want to present myself to the world. And let me go back and present myself in a way that I feel like is good and makes me feel good about myself. Like, that's so empowering to have that opportunity to be able to just have agency over how you look and how you're perceived by your peers.
Absolutely. Yeah, for sure.
Cool. I want to talk a little bit about this assessment piece because you kind of talked a little bit about that at the top in terms of one of the things that you're really prioritizing this year and a way that we move away from the transactional nature of education. So, can you talk to me a little bit about that? Like, how do we give students a say in assessment, and how does all of this jive with video, or does it?
I think the best way I could articulate that is this is kind of what I had done for the assignment that made me fall in love with the submit. So I'll break that down, and hopefully in that we eventually navigate towards the answer to the question you're asking. So I'll break it down with what I was doing. So I was teaching. It was the how to teach phys ed to primary to junior intermediate students. So in the American context, that's your kindergarten to your 8th grade. So I had them do this assignment, and it was called the Social Justice and Physical Education Program, where I had them select one of 6 different journal articles that talked about a marginalized identity in the physical education space. So some of the topics that we provided to the students was the adultification of Black girls and their bodies in physical education programs, anti-Black racism against boys, particularly in the physical education program, and the typecasting of seeing value in Black boys only in athletics. We had LGBTQIA stereotypes that occur in phys ed, sexism, indigenous erasure and appropriation in physical education, and finally universal design for learning, particularly in supporting students with disabilities in gym classes and not feeling disabled and unable to engage in physical education. So those were the different journal articles we had. But the first thing I allowed for students to do was articulate which topic are you interested in engaging in, and rationalize for me
Mhm.
how you have either a deficit understanding of it or have no understanding of it. So this is your opportunity to learn about something you have no idea about. So that was the
Hmm.
first thing. So when you engage students in assessment, that they had some choice and voice in engaging in, that they were at least in the driver's seat to get to the direction they wanted to be evaluated on, to be assessed on, there's your first step, because there's buy-in. So that's the first step. And then after I did that, so this was when I did this assignment, this was the onset of the pandemic. So we were 100% Zoom classes, nothing's in person. So
Mhm.
the conversations being had amongst professors was, well, you're going to have to get them present in breakout rooms on Zoom. And in my head, I was like, how am I supposed to listen and hear these students articulate their deep level understanding in these presentations when I can't be in every breakout room at the same time? And to the answer of that was,
Mhm.
oh, unfortunately, you're only going to get to hear snippets of it, and you're going to have to rely on the ideas and the impact from the group members who were in the breakout room to hear that. Now, that's all fine and dandy, and I have no problem believing students, but I also had the personal experience of being in teaching and working with adults, that when you're talking about topics around race and sexism, those forms of oppression are very real, very visceral, and
Mhm.
very well upheld by the people who love them. And I will tell you straight up, there was a lot of teachers in this teaching program who truly believed in racist, sexist, homophobic, misogynist perspectives. And I'm talking about both genders. I'm talking about all races. So I'm even working with people who are those who are racialized, upholding white supremacy. So, and being okay with it and giving it a pass. So the truth of the matter is that while I understand I want to give students, particularly adult students, the agency to let me know how they received certain topics, I just knew when it came to things around identity and oppression and systemic everything and white supremacy, I had to be present to know some things weren't giving it a pass and some things created tension, because at the end of the day, no one wanted to create tension. So I wasn't okay with the idea that I was going to be 2 minutes here, 2 minutes there, go to breakout room, dancing back and forth between breakout rooms and hearing a smidget of everybody and letting some people get a pass from not dealing with issues. So I was like, what am I going to do here? And then the worst snafu of all was that I did a scheduling error where I had 2 classes presenting on Zoom at the same time, which I was not intending on doing. So I was like, oh no, this is a big scheduling error. And it was an issue because I had another major event that I was organizing, an online conference that day at the same time. I had this huge issue of like, how am I going to, in a very accessible way, give these students the ability to present, A, not at the same time anymore because I totally screwed up that scheduling, but B, do it in a way where they're not going to be pissed at me. Like, they're not going to be like, I'm not rescheduling everybody to either do their presentations earlier or later. Like, nothing's going to change. I'm like, my repairing of this issue is going to be the better option. It's going to be better than what was initially going to happen. And I don't know what it was. Either it was a Google search or whatever. I typed in some phrasing and Screencastify Submit came in, where it's like students just click on one button and automatically the applet comes on onto your screen through Chrome and it records your screen with or without a camera, mic only. Once they hit submit, done, it goes into a Google Drive folder. Bob's your uncle, we're done. And I couldn't believe it. I was like, for real? Like, this is it? Like, I was panicking. I was like thinking, okay, I got to teach all these students how to record, then how to download, then how to upload, then how to submit, then how to do this. And then it has to be MP4. It has to be that. And Submit just satisfied all of it. And it blew my mind. So when that happened and when I saw the way it deposits into your Google Drive, that is when this waterfall of ideas came to my head. I'm like, whoa, I could leverage the link that these Google Drive files permit you to use. I could use these links and create little like film festivals, and I can create situations where I have students. I can make groupings of students where they have to watch the presentations, just one, not everybody, but they can thoughtfully watch one presentation from every person who read an article they didn't read. And then I can facilitate opportunity, use time differently, where they can actually go at it and have a conversation with each other, synchronously and asynchronously. So then even my brain started going further, where I was like, I could use Google Forms, where like, how at film festivals, the thing that people love about film festivals is that after you watch the movie, the stars of the movie and the directors and everything come to the front of stage and you can ask them questions. So what I did was I leveraged Autocrat, another tool called Formule, to create a system that took the Screencastify links. I had it create documents that would deliver a Google Doc to each student, only the links for videos that they didn't see. So they'd be into a group. And then the students, via their phone, via an iPad, via their computer, just click on these different links, watch this 10-minute or less presentation from each person, be really engaged. And at the bottom of that document that had all the links, there was one single Google form. You click on that Google form, select from a drop-down menu, whose video did you just watch? And then you had a space to type in text where write down your questions, your tensions, your issues, your concerns, your happiness, your joyfulness of what you got from this presentation. And then from that Google form, produced another document using a doc appender that then delivered to the person who made the presentation all of the comments and feedback they got from anybody who watched your presentation. And then what I provided, that was 1 week's time out of class. You know what I mean? Like, we didn't even have class. I said, anytime this week, when you feel comfortable, be it lying in bed, be it when you're ready for class, when you're on transit, when you're in the bus, whatever, in a park, watch these presentations, jot down your thoughts when you feel good enough, send them in the Google form. And then next week, I will give you time and space to have a conversation with one another about what you each wrote to each other about your videos. And the thing that was amazing about that was that, so often students don't like the whole idea of like, you have to be on. Like the moment someone says something to you, you gotta be right there like a lawyer ready to say the best response right then and there. But this way, by leveraging all these tools, I give a lot of students, the people who created the videos and the people who put forth their thoughts and their comments, a week to percolate on what was said. So not that they come in with like their armor ready to like defend themselves or whatever, but it gives you an opportunity to by yourself be angry about what someone said, to think for a second, maybe they have a point, to wonder, to ponder, to maybe read into something they said. Because so many students were like, the thing you just said here is really problematic. And just to help you understand why it's problematic, watch this link from, Amber Ruffin, or watch this link from, the Black Lives Matter movement, and make sense of why what you said was an issue. So it was very, very cool. Again, this goes back to the whole idea of leveraging time and leveraging space in a different way. Now, to get to the answer of what you had asked initially as to what does this do for assessment, it gives me I guess, quote unquote, the evaluator, the person who's overseeing all this, the opportunity to say that did I set the conditions for every student to give and put forth their very best work, to be thoughtful, to really be accountable for their learning? And did I not allow things like time constraints, social pressure, my pressure, deadlines, due dates, the parallels of other classes and other assignments they had? Did I set the conditions to have the truest form of student learning provided to me to assess? If I'm going to like kiss myself and praise myself, I would say yes, based on what I described to you. In my opinion, I did. And so when I assess that work, not only do I have the documentation of students who got to watch these presentations, who thoughtfully watched it and were impacted and responded to what they got and learned from that video, but I also have the students' presentation that I can watch fully and wholly and review if I need to. And also, which I want to share with everyone, I can also accelerate the pace of the video. Think about your student who speaks at a turtle pace. These videos, like, it sounds jokey, but like these videos allow me to say accelerate the speed by 2 times or 4 times. And all of a sudden, a student who speaks in a very slow drawl or takes a lot of pauses is reading at a more rapid pace. So it saves me time even. I'm even cutting the time it would normally take me to listen to a student, to hear them in an expedited fashion. But I have all these pieces. And at the end of the day, if ever the assessment wasn't agreed upon, or there was, just some kind of disagreement, I would have the opportunity and all the evidence all at hand. It's not hearsay. I have it all documented. Links here, links there, documentation everywhere, to sit with the student and say, okay, if you were to read all of this, you're a soon-to-be teacher, you were to read all of this, and you were to see this, let's look at your video, let's look at a transcript of your video even. You tell me what mark you feel you deserve, and we can sit there and collaboratively talk about it. So it was, I'm sorry I gave you such a long journey of that, but it's just, there's, as teachers, when we grade and we evaluate students, again, I said this before, this is the currency that students work in. Like, us in the capitalist world, we sometimes equate our value to how much we get paid. These students they equate their value based on their grade. And if they got a grade that they felt like they had no power over, that they felt was unfair, unjust, or truly not reflective of their learning, you have to ask yourself as a practitioner, did I permit not only the conditions for the student to flourish and give their best learning forward, but do I have all pieces of evidence before me to say I have multiple modes of evidence to assist me to get to this conclusion as to this is why I've provided you this grade. This is what I believe based on these sources and based on these data. And this data that is not just mine and my own biased opinion. It's yours. It's somebody else's. It's 5 other people's. It's the discourse that came out of this. So, a lot.
Yeah, that is a lot, but I think a lot in a good way. And there are a couple of things I want to point out. I think that there is this broader umbrella that you're talking about around accountability, which I think is so dang important when we think about learning and development. And in this assignment that you described, folks are accountable in multiple ways, right? Like, I think like if you just give the presentation and you sit down, you kind of wash your hands a bit. But instead of that being it, they got all of these questions and these comments, and then they were responsible for being able to respond to that. And that's one level of accountability, right? They've got this other level of accountability where they have to go back and sort of relive what they have done. And then they're accountable to themselves. So they don't get to just like sort of have this revisionist history of what their presentation was like, whether that's a good or bad. It's like they've seen it for like everything that it was and everything that it wasn't, and they're accountable on that level. And then they also get to have this conversation about what they actually deserve based off of like the rubric and conversations that they've had with multiple people. So it turns from this one level of assessment that is just the presentation to these like sort of like layers on top of layers in terms of them describing their own learning and being accountable to it, which is kind of crazy. It's like it's awesome. It's like it's so simple in its approach, but it is so impactful in the way that it actually like sort of played out.
No, and I appreciate that. And one thing I forgot to actually mention is when the student at the beginning of the assignment picked the article that they'd like to read, I actually put them in groups. And what I do is I provide all the people who are in one particular journal article group, I provide them one document, one PDF of that journal, and I send it to them through a tool called Cami. And Cami basically allows you to, sorry, I don't mean to mansplain Cami to anybody here, but just in case, just in case any of our listeners.
Don't mansplain. Yeah, go for it. Go for it.
So what I appreciated about Cami was they allowed me to put in a PDF document in there and allowed for any collaborator on that document to either leave a text comment, a voice comment, or a video comment. So what it allowed for, what I thought to myself was, this is like me creating a lab where these group members can go in, read the same document, and while they're reading particular lines, share with their own actual voice and video or text their thoughts and their understandings about what this paragraph is saying. So the thing is that what I appreciate about that was that they also engaged in their understanding of the article, not insularly, like they were doing it in collaboration with people. And why that's meaningful was that, I was able to put people of, as I said, these articles were delegated based on oppressed identities in the physical education realm. I was able to put people who, I was able to surmise, not on my own, like we worked together as a class to open up and submit, what are some of the identities that we see intersectional that we live with. I was able to put people who had identities that were in line with some of these articles to be in spaces with people who don't have those identities. So there was able to be even a cross personal conversation within the group before they even made their presentations on their understanding of the content of the journal. So even, sorry, Nef, to bring it back to the assessment piece, even when there were some students I had to face to be like, why would you do a presentation on like this kumbaya perspective of like, we should all love students and blah, blah, blah. We're all equal. We're all God's children business. Why would you do that when you read this article? And on top of that, when I look at the article, when I listen to the article, because there's voice notes, you all had a conversation on like the ramifications of this and how the kumbaya perspective that we're all equal and we're all going to hold hands and we're all equal in the eyes of the teacher kind of thing. To not give light to that, you totally ignored your group members that I have evidence of on this document, and you just kind of went with it. Like you went on autopilot and did whatever you felt like. Like, why? Why would you do that? And so this goes back to the assessment piece, because assessment is, we always think that the end of the road of assessment and evaluation is give me that grade. But assessment evaluation this is the depth of your learning. This is who you are. Like, this is how much you changed, or hell, you didn't change at all. This learning did nothing for you, right? Forget about the number, forget about the quantity that comes out of this. You did this. You did this in multiple layers. You engage with multiple stakeholders and people about this very contentious topic, and nothing changed. That's a problem, So it's, anyway, sorry. I just wanted to mention that Cami played a big role too.
Yeah. And I like that you explained, Cami. The good thing about being a podcast host is that if you don't know something, you could be like, yeah, I totally know what you're talking about. But for the listeners, why don't you explain it?
No problem.
I get to pretend to know everything. But I have spoken to some of the Kami folks, and they are an awesome crowd, making a really awesome product. For folks who might not know what it is and maybe want to check it out, it is KAMI, just so that you Google and arrive at the right thing. But I do like that you sort of create this juxtaposition between where people are at the onset of the assignment and where they get, right? And you have these like multiple sort of like check-ins and learning experiences where you can kind of say, okay, I gave you the opportunity to learn a little bit by listening to voice notes or seeing text notes in Canvas. And then you gave the presentation and theoretically you learned something from having to articulate your thoughts. And then you had to respond to these questions, right? And I think a lot of times when we think about assessment, and you called this out too, it is a one-time act, right? And what's really cool about this is that there are multi-layers. And I keep saying layers, because I think that's like so important, right? That it's like, whether we call it a learning event, an experience, a layer, whatever it is, it can't be this one-time
Mm,
experience that students engage in and then they get to sort of throw in the trash metaphorically.
absolutely. Absolutely. No doubt.
Cool. I love having you on and kind of like going through this because I feel like you have such cool experiences of not only working with kids, as many listeners are, but also having this alternate experience of working with classroom practitioners and thinking about what sort of pedagogy do we want to espouse when we put teachers in the classroom. So, before I let you go, I do want to ask one important question because it feels like you got so much out of using Screencastify Submit.
Mm.
And I'm curious for folks who are looking to integrate a tool like Submit, what's one piece of advice that you would give to them?
Don't have it be a straight substitution for presentations, and that
Hmm.
it doesn't, that this opportunity doesn't grow legs. As I had articulated throughout this moment with between you and I, the moment I engage with Screencastify Submit, it let off fireworks in my brain to be like, okay, you can use this tool to do that. You can use this tool to do that. Use Google Docs in this way. Use Google Forms in this way. Use Cami. Use Autocrat. Use Formula. Like my brain started just really going off in these different synapses of like, how can you leverage this learning experience differently through and by technology, and
Mm-hmm.
only to enhance the learning experience, not because it's easy, not because it saves time, but because it enhanced the learning experience and it made you a better practitioner and it made the learning experience better for students. So my one piece of advice, just to pull back onto that, to the starting point, is don't use it simply to substitute that in-class presentation that you're looking to reform or change. It needs to grow legs. It needs to, if you can't if the ends don't justify the means, and the ends I'm talking about are that the learning experience is better for the students, your assessment practices are more relevant to the actual student learning experience and learning journey. Just back to your point, Nef, that it's not the end. It wasn't the end goal. It was the whole journey. It was the whole experience.
Mm.
If Submit's use doesn't let off those synapses in your head, visit it later. Come to it later. Play around with it. But when you want to use it, you bring it into the classroom, you bring it with your students. I know the context of what I spoke with is only adults, and a lot of people might be listening and think, oh, well, yeah, of course you'd get such detailed and informative and thought-provoking experience with adults. But as we all know as educators, if you want to see particular outcomes for the students, you got to not only give them chance, time, and opportunity, but you also have to scaffold it. You have to teach it. So
Yeah.
use Submit to give students those trial and error opportunities to be more evocative, elaborative, detailed, engage in discourse, be comfortable with hearing their own voice. So use Submit if you want to take your practice and the student learning experience to a whole new level. If you're looking for replacement substitution, you know, pause maybe.
All right. I like it. I think that a lot of folks think about technology as substitution. And I think that's an okay place to start.
It is.
It's a
I agree.
fine place to start. But I think when we get to have these like really amazing experiences for students is when we ask ourselves what technology allows us to do above and beyond just substitution. So I love that, right? And I think that what's cool about that advice is that it spans any technology tool or any new
Absolutely.
practice that you might want to implement this year, right? It's like, how is this not just a placeholder for what I used to do, but how does it allow me to transform my classroom? And I think if we keep that in the back of our minds, we get to some like really, really dope experiences for kids.
I appreciate the reframing because I think what I mean to what I also like to add on to that is when you enter into using a tool and you think to yourself, what are the potential opportunities or potential outcomes that come from this? You become a little bit more forgiving on yourself and forgiving on the tool when things don't go as planned because
Mm,
you were just engaging in a way that you were seeing what was the potential, right? And as we know about potential, sometimes it's you give it a go at the beginning and it goes 100% and everything is the way you want it to be,
mhm.
and sometimes you fall short, but as if I want to be cliche about it, if you shoot for the stars, even if you miss, you're going to fall in the clouds, right? So it's go in thinking to yourself, what is the potential of this tool? But Neff, I appreciate you reframing that because one thing I'm working on is I need to stop talking in a zero sum game, like where it's like do this or don't do it at all. I got to stop that. So I appreciate you. Thank you.
Yeah, no worries at all. But yeah, I do like that. And I like you kind of adding on this idea of potential, right? In terms of like, what is your wildest dream for like what this tool can do, for what this unit can be for your kids, all that, right? And then it's like, oh, okay. So like if we don't hit that, then like it's still okay. And if we do, then dang, it's gonna be amazing. So I
Absolutely.
really, really like that. All right. I appreciate you joining EdTech Heroes. Y'all, if you're listening to this, make sure that you connect with Sultan on LinkedIn, and we'll link his LinkedIn down in the show notes. Thank you for listening. I am your host, Nef, and I'm looking forward to seeing each and every one of you next time.
Thank you for listening to this episode of EdTech Heroes, presented by Screencastify.